Picture an NBA possession in the late 1980s. The average player is roughly 6'7". Passing lanes are crowded by long arms, the paint is protected by centers who seem to fill the entire frame, and every coach is searching for more size. Then a point guard listed at 5 feet 3 inches walks onto the floor. Tyrone Curtis Bogues was 16 inches shorter than the average NBA player when he debuted. He was not just short for his position. He was shorter than millions of people watching from the stands. That made him instantly recognizable, but it also created a problem that followed him into every arena. Before opponents studied his passing or his defense, they saw the height. Before he played a minute, many people had already decided what he could not be. The world came to know him as Muggsy. It remembered the photographs beside 7'7" Manute Bol and the easy trivia answer, the shortest player in NBA history. Those images explain why people looked. They do not explain why an NBA team used a first-round pick on him, why coaches trusted him to start, or why he remained in the league for 14 seasons. That is the question at the center of his career. At 5 feet 3, reaching the NBA could have become a one-night curiosity. Staying meant surviving thousands of possessions after the surprise was gone. Every opponent knew where the mismatch appeared to be. Every coach could design an offense to find him. If Bogues could not defend, protect the ball, and organize 4 much larger teammates, the experiment would end quickly. It did not end quickly. He played 889 regular season games, started more than 500 of them, and retired with nearly as many assists as points. The league had 14 years to expose him. Instead, Bogues forced it to reconsider what an NBA body could look like. The explanation begins in East Baltimore, where being overlooked was hardly the most serious problem a child could face. Bogues grew up in the Lafayette Court Housing Project, the youngest of 4 children. His mother stood 4 feet 11 inches and his father 5 feet 5, so nobody expected a sudden growth spurt to change the outline of his future. His surroundings created a different kind of uncertainty. Violence and addiction were close enough to enter the family home, not distant stories seen on television. At 5 years old, Bogues was struck by stray buckshot and hospitalized. He later recalled witnessing a man beaten to death with a baseball bat. He rarely used those experiences as a simple explanation for everything he became. Basketball did not erase that childhood. It gave him a place where preparation, speed, and nerve could produce a result he could control. The family came under even greater pressure when Bogues was 12. His father received a 20-year prison sentence for armed robbery, and his older brother Chucky was pulled into drug addiction. 2 important figures disappeared from his daily life in different ways. His mother, Elaine, was left to hold the household together. Around the Baltimore playgrounds, Tyrone acquired the name that would follow him around the world. Muggsy came from a small combative character in the old Bowery Boys films. The nickname fit the energy people saw, but his game was already more disciplined than the name suggested. He was not trying to overpower anyone. He learned to arrive first, keep his dribble lower than a defender could reach, and treat every loose ball as if it already belonged to him. His route to the school that changed his life was almost accidental. Bogues first attended Southern High, then transferred to Dunbar because the school offered healthcare courses and he was considering work as a dental technician. Basketball made the transfer historic. Dunbar's coach, Bob Wade, was building one of the deepest high school teams in the country with future NBA players David Wingate, Reggie Williams, and Reggie Lewis in the program. Bogues entered a gym full of players scouts could identify from the doorway. David Wingate, Reggie Williams, and Reggie Lewis all had the bodies recruiters expected. Lewis would become an NBA All-Star and still could not crack Dunbar's starting 5. Bogues had to make himself essential in ways that could be felt before they appeared on a stat sheet. Coach Bob Wade built the Poets around defense, discipline, and waves of pressure. Bogues was the natural trigger. A routine high school possession could begin with an opponent trying to see over him, then turning sideways to protect the dribble, then discovering that the first pass had arrived late. By the time the ball crossed half court, Dunbar's longer defenders were waiting, and the offense had already surrendered part of the shot clock. At the other end, Bogues did not compete with his teammates for the same shots. He accelerated their talent. Wingate and Williams received the ball while a lane was still open. Lewis could run without wondering whether the pass would arrive. The 5'3" guard became the organizer of a lineup crowded with future professionals. The result was almost absurd. Dunbar went 29-0 in Bogues' junior season and 31-0 in his senior year. 60 games, 60 victories. USA Today ranked the Poets #1 in the nation, and Bogues was the team's most valuable player as a senior. He was not being protected by a great high school team. One of the greatest collections of high school talent ever assembled trusted him to decide how it played. Wake Forest offered a harder test because the physical advantage now belonged to nearly everyone else. The Atlantic Coast Conference was filled with future professionals, packed arenas, and guards who had spent their lives looking over defenders. Bogues forced them to look down. That small change disturbed habits built through thousands of possessions. The sharpest early example came against Duke in 1985. Johnny Dawkins was an All-American scorer, riding a streak of 51 consecutive games in double figures. Wake Forest gave Bogues the assignment. Every time Dawkins tried to begin an attack, he had to account for a defender close enough to touch the dribble before it reached its highest point. Dawkins finished with 8 points. The streak ended, and the result could not be explained by Bogues hiding on a weaker opponent. He had been placed directly in front of one of the finest guards in college basketball and changed the shape of the matchup. The challenge was not to contest Dawkins at the top of his jump. It was to make every comfortable step before that jump disappear. A year later, Bogues supplied the other half of the argument at top-ranked North Carolina. He delivered 17 assists, then an ACC single-game record. Against a defense filled with length, he kept finding the next pass before the window closed. One performance showed that he could take an elite guard out of rhythm. The other showed that he could create rhythm for an entire team. By the time he left Wake Forest, Bogues held school records with 781 assists and 275 steals. As a senior, he made first-team All-ACC while leading the conference in both categories. College basketball had 4 seasons to turn his height into a fatal weakness. Instead, it gave NBA scouts a detailed record of the skills that might survive the next level. Bogues understood why his defense worked. He once explained that being low to the floor gave him first access whenever a larger player started a dribble. The opponent had to bring the ball down into his territory. His height created obvious problems near the rim, but 20 or 30 feet from the basket, it could also distort the geometry of a possession. Bogues never pretended size was irrelevant. He built a game that reduced the number of moments when size decided the result. He picked up guards early, attacked the dribble before an offense could settle, protected the ball close to the floor, and moved it before long arms could close the window. The weakness remained visible. So did the solutions. In 1986, he joined the United States team at the FIBA World Championship in Spain. The Americans won gold, and Bogues played in all 10 games while leading the team in assists and steals. International opponents who had never faced him experienced the same adjustment as the ACC. The first reaction was surprise. The next was the realization that the ball was no longer safe. There was still no guarantee that the NBA would make the same calculation. Before the draft, Bogues spent part of 1987 with the Rhode Island Gulls of the United States Basketball League. He averaged 22.2 points and 8.4 assists, led the league in minutes, and helped the Gulls lead the league in attendance. An ankle injury ended the run early, but the short schedule showed something important. When a team gave him possession of the offense, he could produce far more than an interesting photograph. The 1987 NBA draft offered teams safer choices. David Robinson, Scottie Pippen, Reggie Miller, Kevin Johnson, Horace Grant, Mark Jackson, and Reggie Lewis were all available in a class loaded with future stars. Washington still used the 12th pick on Bogues. It was a first-round commitment, not a ceremonial invitation. On November 6th, against Atlanta, Bogues started his first NBA game and led Washington in assists. He was immediately asked to run an offense against veteran professionals, and the debut did not look like a publicity appearance. The publicity came anyway. Washington also employed Manute Bol, listed at 7 feet 7 inches. The difference between them was 28 inches, and photographs of the two teammates appeared everywhere. One man had to look almost straight up, the other almost straight down. For magazines and television, the image was irresistible. It was also incomplete. Bol was an elite shot blocker, and Bogues led the Bullets in assists and steals as a rookie, despite starting only 14 games. Both men were being marketed through their bodies while doing serious defensive work that had little to do with the joke. That shared problem gave the famous photograph more meaning than the captions usually allowed. Their skills attacked opposite ends of the same possession. Bogues met the ball before the offense could organize. Ball waited near the rim after it did. One defender tried to steal seconds from a guard. The other made the final shot seem unreachable. Washington had placed the shortest and tallest players in NBA history on one roster, but the contrast was more than visual. Both survived by turning an unusual body into a specialized form of pressure. For one season, the famous photograph also served as a map of how Washington could challenge a possession from the first dribble to the rim. The cameras kept asking them to stand together. The game asked each man to control a different piece of the floor. Bogues even recorded 39 blocked shots during his NBA career. One came against Patrick Ewing. It was not a conventional rejection at the top of the jump. Bogues reached the ball as the 7-foot center began his shooting motion and knocked it free. Timing turned an impossible vertical contest into a play he could win. Washington left him unprotected in the 1988 expansion draft. Established teams could protect only part of their rosters, so the decision was not proof that the Bullets considered him worthless. It did show that after one season, he was not among the players they were most determined to keep. The new Charlotte Hornets selected him and offered something Washington could not: a franchise with no fixed hierarchy and an identity waiting to be created. The opportunity was not immediate. Bogues began Charlotte's first season as part of a crowded rotation and started 21 games. He still averaged nearly 8 assists. During the following season, an injury to another guard pushed him into a larger role under coach Dick Harter. Bogues responded with 10.7 assists per game, 4th best in the NBA. By the time Harter was fired midway through that season, the argument over whether Bogues could start had already changed. He was doing it. To understand why, watch where the pressure began. Most point guards defended near half court and tried to guide an opponent into help. Bogues could pick up the ball handler across all 94 feet. His first goal was not necessarily a steal. It was to make the other guard turn his back, change hands, or waste seconds protecting the dribble. Charlotte's defense could begin working before the offense reached its first set. Larger guards tried to post him. Bogues was compact, strong, and difficult to dislodge cleanly because his center of gravity sat below theirs. He told Charlotte's coaches that the players posting him were often more uncomfortable than he was. They were abandoning their normal games to chase a mismatch that looked better on paper than it felt on the floor. The players who faced him described the pressure more clearly than any scouting report. Kenny Smith called Bogues the toughest on-ball defender he ever faced. Steve Smith said one college encounter with Bogues helped convince him that he should become a shooting guard rather than an NBA point guard. Steve Kerr remembered wanting to hand the ball to somebody else whenever Bogues met him in the backcourt. Chris Webber recalled guards calling for a screen simply to escape him. The big men noticed him too. Shaquille O'Neal later admitted that Bogues worried him whenever he put the ball on the floor. Once a center began a dribble, the ball had to enter Bogues' reach. These were not compliments based on inspiration. They were descriptions of a problem opponents had to solve. His offense followed the same rule: decide before the defense could use its size. Bogues changed speeds, slipped through narrow gaps, and passed from angles defenders were not used to covering. Reaching for his low dribble meant bending and gambling. If the first defender missed, Bogues was already inside the defense with a scorer waiting for the ball. Alonzo Mourning remembered him driving among the big men and finding openings through a forest of ARMs. Glenn Rice credited those precise deliveries with creating extra shots. Del Curry put the hierarchy more simply. Bogues was the team's general, and the ball belonged in his hands. That trust became the foundation of Charlotte basketball. The early Hornets were an expansion team collecting players and losses. Bogues and Curry were there before the franchise had a history. Larry Johnson arrived as the first pick in 1991, and Alonzo Mourning followed with the second pick a year later. Charlotte suddenly had power, size, scoring, and one of the fastest organizers in the league. The team also became a cultural phenomenon before it became a consistent winner. Purple and teal spread far beyond North Carolina, and the Charlotte Coliseum became one of the loudest symbols of the NBA's expansion era. The Hornets led the league in attendance during their inaugural season, and later did it 7 consecutive times from 1990 to 1997. Their sellout streak eventually reached 364 regular season games. Bogues was central to that popularity, but popularity alone could have trapped him in the same role as the photographs with Manute Bol. Charlotte fans saw enough possessions to know the difference. They watched him direct losing expansion teams before Johnson and Mourning arrived, then perform the same job when the games gained national attention. The image drew people toward him. Repetition built credibility. A new franchise needs faces the city can recognize, but it also needs players capable of surviving the years before the roster is complete. Bogues and Curry connected both periods. They were marketable without being manufactured, familiar without becoming disposable mascots, and productive while Charlotte learned how to build an NBA team. The combination changed expectations during the 1992-93 season. Charlotte won 44 games and reached the playoffs for the first time. Game 1 against Boston ended in defeat, but Bogues delivered 15 assists with only 1 turnover. The stage was new. His control of the ball was not. Game 2 became a test of endurance. Bogues played 47 minutes as the Hornets and Celtics went through 2 overtimes. He scored 13 points, handed out 8 assists, and again committed only 1 turnover. Charlotte escaped Boston with a 1-point victory and brought the series home tied. The Hornets then overwhelmed the Celtics by 30 points in their first home playoff game. Game 4 was different. Boston led by 1 with 3 seconds left, close enough to send Charlotte's first postseason run back to Massachusetts. Del Curry inbounded to Alonzo Mourning near the top of the key. Mourning took 1 hard dribble and rose over 2 defenders. The ball struck the back rim and fell through with 0.4 of a second remaining. Charlotte had its first playoff series victory. Mourning owned the final image, but Bogues had controlled the route to it. Across the 4 games, he averaged almost 10 assists and fewer than 2 turnovers. The smallest player in the series had been trusted with the ball during the most important week in franchise history. The next round brought Pat Riley's New York Knicks, one of the most physical defensive teams of the era. Charlotte lost the first 2 games, then fought Game 3 into double overtime. With the score tied at 106 in the final minute, the ball reached Bogues. He shaped his body as if he were passing, held the defender for a fraction of a second, and rose into an open jumper. It fell. 2 free throws followed, and Charlotte won 110-106. Bogues finished that night with 16 points, 8 assists, 5 steals, and only 2 turnovers. The Knicks could live with Larry Johnson or Mourning taking the decisive shot. Bogues recognized that expectation and used it. Charlotte eventually lost the series in 5 games, but its 9-game postseason had removed the last useful version of the novelty argument. When the possessions became slower and more physical, the Hornets still trusted him to make the decision. His regular season numbers had already done most of that work. From 1989 through 1995, Bogues finished among the NBA's top 10 in assists 6 consecutive times, and in 5 of those seasons, he ranked 4th or better. In 1992 to 93, he led the league in assist-to-turnover ratio. He created shots for teammates without giving possessions back. On April 23, 1994, he delivered 19 assists against Boston, matching the highest total of his NBA career and establishing a Hornets record at the time. A number that large requires more than one hot combination with a scorer. It means reading changes in coverage across an entire game and continuing to find the next open teammate after the defense adjusts. The following season was his most complete. Bogues averaged 10.8 points and 10.1 assists, becoming one of the rare NBA players to average a points and assists double-double. He also pulled down more than 4 rebounds per game. At 5'3", those rebounds began with anticipation. By then, everyone in Charlotte understood that Bogues would enter spaces other players assumed were empty. In 1994 to 95, he raised his scoring average again to a career-best 11.1 while shooting 47.7% from the field. Charlotte won 50 games for the first time. The Hornets were not favorites to win the championship, but they had become a legitimate playoff team in an Eastern Conference controlled by far more established powers. Bogues was 30 years old, starting almost every night, and producing more points than ever for the best regular season team Charlotte had assembled. Nothing about that moment looked like the end of his prime. The Hornets had Johnson, Mourning, Curry, and a point guard who had spent years learning exactly where each of them wanted the ball. The next question seemed to be how far that group could go together. Within months, the group and the point guard's body would both begin to change. The turning point is often told incorrectly. Charlotte met Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the first round of the 1995 playoffs. Years later, a story spread across television segments, social media posts, and basketball forums. According to the tale, Jordan backed away from Bogues during a crucial moment, challenged him to shoot, insulted his height, and destroyed his confidence when the shot missed. The story offered a perfect villain, a perfect victim, and a simple explanation for everything that followed. It also offered a version of Muggsy Bogues that did not resemble the player who had spent his entire career absorbing comments about his body. Bogues has repeatedly denied that the exchange happened as the legend describes. He laughed when asked whether one sentence from Jordan ended his career and pointed to the years he continued playing afterward. The rumor survives because it feels cinematic. Reality was less convenient and more physical. Bogues entered that series after the highest-scoring regular season of his career. Chicago eliminated Charlotte in 4 games, but a missed jumper did not suddenly remove his ability to play basketball. A few months later, in August of 1995, he underwent arthroscopic surgery on his left knee. Recovery became the problem that one viral anecdote would later conceal. The knee did not respond on schedule. Bogues moved on and off the injured list and appeared in only 6 games during the 1995-96 season. He scored 14 points all year. For a guard whose game depended on acceleration, balance, and the ability to change direction before a larger defender could react, even a small loss of movement changed every calculation. That is what the Jordan myth gets backward. Bogues did not fade because somebody finally noticed he was short. Every NBA opponent had noticed. He lost time because the physical tools that allowed him to solve the height problem were being compromised by injury. The same period placed strain on his life away from the arena. Bogues separated from his wife Kim in 1995. His father had died of pneumonia 2 years earlier after a difficult life that included prison and addiction. His brother Chucky was still fighting an addiction that had begun when the family was young. Bogues responded by bringing Chucky into his home. The decision did not produce an instant or simple recovery. It created a stable place in which one could begin. A 2019 report found that Chucky had remained free from drug addiction for 23 years and was still living with his brother. Muggsy opened the door. Chucky did the long work of walking through it. Meanwhile, the basketball comeback continued. Bogues returned for 65 games in 1996 to 97 and averaged more than 7 assists. Charlotte won 54 games, the best regular season total of his years with the franchise. The version of Bogues who had averaged a double-double was no longer available every night, but the idea that he disappeared after facing Jordan does not survive contact with that season. It was also a different Charlotte team. Alonzo Mourning had been traded to Miami, Larry Johnson to New York, and the young core that had won the franchise's first playoff series no longer existed. Glenn Rice had become the primary scorer, with Anthony Mason and Vlade Divac changing the shape of the front line. Bogues was not simply returning from surgery. He was learning new teammates after the passing targets that had defined his best years were gone. The Hornets won more regular season games than the Mourning-Johnson group ever had. Rice became an all-NBA player, Mason supplied playmaking from the forward position, and Bogues shared more responsibility than before. Charlotte's first-round loss to New York was disappointing, but 65 appearances and 7 assists per game represented a substantial comeback from 6 games and 14 total points. That season makes his career easier to understand in 3 acts. The first Charlotte teams needed his speed to create order out of expansion chaos. The young playoff teams needed him to feed emerging stars. The later team needed him to fit beside other playmakers while protecting a knee that no longer permitted constant full-court pressure. He remained useful because he did not confuse one role with his entire identity. The comeback did not erase the uncertainty. Bogues was 32, undersized even by ordinary standards, and carrying a medical history that gave the organization a reasonable reason to search for another point guard. Every missed game made the future easier for management to imagine without him. Every return made the separation harder for Bogues to accept. The comeback supplied one more answer to the Jordan story. Bogues did not return as a player afraid to shoot. He made 63 pointers that season, more than twice his previous career high, and converted 41.7% of them. The shot that supposedly broke him had become more reliable after knee surgery. Earlier in his career, Bogues could punish a defender for backing away by using the open floor to build speed. The repaired knee made that burst less dependable. A better three-point shot gave him another response. If a guard sagged into the lane to help against Glenn Rice or Vlade Divac, Bogues could now make the defense pay without first reaching the paint. That adjustment changed the visual language of his game. The younger Bogues attacked space with his feet. The returning veteran sometimes attacked it by staying still and being ready. He was no longer asking the repaired knee to create every advantage. 65 games and a career-best season from long range showed that the injury had changed his game without ending his usefulness. But a successful return did not guarantee a future in Charlotte. Bogues had missed almost an entire season, was now 32, and needed the knee to cooperate every night. The Hornets had just produced the best record in franchise history, yet management could also see how quickly one injury had changed the roster. The debate was no longer about whether he belonged in the NBA. It was about how much of him remained and how long Charlotte was willing to wait for the answer. That uncertainty created the sharpest conflict of his professional life. Bogues believed the 65-game comeback proved that he could still run the team. The organization saw the same season and prepared a succession plan. Both sides could point to the evidence. Only one of them controlled the roster. Coach Dave Cowens publicly suggested that Bogues consider retirement because of the knee. Charlotte then signed David Wesley to a 7-year contract. Wesley took the starting job, and Bogues opened the 1997-98 season playing only a few minutes at a time. After nearly a decade as the man who decided where the ball went, he was watching the new offense form without him. The change was especially difficult because Bogues believed he had been promised a different ending. Owner George Shinn had told him in August that he could finish his career in Charlotte. Weeks later, the club requested another examination of the knee. Bogues read the message clearly. The comeback had not restored the organization's confidence. On November 7th, roughly 2 hours before a home game, the Hornets announced the trade. Bogues and Tony Delk were going to Golden State for B.J. Armstrong. Del Curry was now the only player left from Charlotte's inaugural roster. Curry said his longtime teammate felt as if he were being pushed out. Bogues had also begun asking for a trade because remaining without a real role had become intolerable. The move made basketball sense. Charlotte had a healthy replacement, while Bogues was 32 and carrying a damaged knee. That logic did not soften the personal meaning. He had joined a franchise with no history, stayed through the losing seasons, delivered the ball through its first playoff breakthrough, and watched the city turn teal and purple. Now 10 years of shared identity had been reduced to a transaction announced before tip-off. Bogues left angry and cut ties with the organization for a time. The split did not need a cartoon villain. Charlotte could be rational about the future, Bogues could understand the business, and the ending could still feel like a betrayal. That is what made it more painful than the Jordan myth. One was an invented insult he could dismiss. The other was a real decision made by the team he had helped build. Golden State could not recreate what Charlotte had meant, but it gave Bogues a basketball job instead of a farewell tour. He started fewer than half his games during the 1997-98 season and still led the Warriors in assists. The first step was slower. The decisions remained quick. When an offense became disorganized, he could enter, call the set, and return the ball to the right hands. That season also gave him time to finish something basketball had interrupted. Bogues had left Wake Forest 19 credits short of a degree. He completed the work through summer classes and correspondence courses and received a Bachelor of Arts in Speech Communications in May of 1998. He had spent years proving that leaving college early was not the same as abandoning it. The following season never found a rhythm. A lockout delayed the schedule, then packed 50 games into a shortened calendar. Hamstring trouble, the recurring knee problem, and even chickenpox limited Bogues to 36 appearances. There was no dramatic final injury. His availability was being reduced one interruption at a time. Toronto offered another opening in 1999 and reunited him with Del Curry. The Raptors were moving in the opposite direction from the old Hornets. Charlotte had needed Bogues to help create a franchise identity. Toronto was beginning to discover its future through Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady. Bogues arrived as a veteran asked to support somebody else's rise. He started only 5 games. Some nights he waited through long stretches, then entered to protect a lead or calm a possession. Carter and McGrady could finish above defenders in ways Bogues never could. His task was less visible: bring the ball across safely, read the help, and deliver it early enough for their athleticism to matter. He accepted the smaller role without becoming careless. Bogues appeared in 80 games, his highest total in 7 seasons, and averaged fewer than 1 turnover a night. His scoring and assist numbers fell, but coaches could still trust the possession. That was enough to keep a 35-year-old reserve in the rotation. Then on March 3, 2000, Boston left him with openings, and Bogues kept taking them. His first 6 shots went in. All 4 of his 3-point attempts went in. So did all 8 of his free throws. He finished with 24 points without missing a field goal or a foul shot as Toronto won 114-104. Carter scored 30, McGrady scored 24, and Bogues matched McGrady from the bench. Celtics coach Rick Pitino could only joke that if Muggsy was making 4 threes, Boston's luck had turned bad. The humor came from surprise, but the moment carried a sharper point. 5 years after a fictional missed jumper supposedly ruined him, Bogues tied his career high by refusing to miss. Del Curry's sons were often around those Raptors, watching the routines of professional players. Footage of a young Stephen Curry sharing a court with Bogues later became another unlikely bridge between eras. One guard would change the game by extending its range. The other had already changed its sense of scale. There was no storybook finish after that night. Bogues played 3 games the following season. His final appearance came against Chicago on January 27, 2001. He did not score, and nobody in the building knew they were watching the last minutes of his NBA career. Toronto traded his rights to New York in February. The Knicks moved them to Dallas that August, but Bogues never appeared for either team. His mother was dealing with cancer, and basketball could no longer claim first place in every decision. He told the Mavericks that he intended to step away and care for her. Mark Cuban waived him while guaranteeing the money left on his contract. After his mother died, Bogues still spoke about another comeback. It never came. His career ended without a retirement ceremony, one more transaction separating the last game from the final realization that there would not be another. The scoreless game against Chicago was not a useful summary of the career. The final ledger was 889 games, 556 starts, 6,858 points, 6,726 assists, 1,369 steals, 146 double-doubles. 4 franchises found a place for him across 14 seasons. Those totals contain 3 different careers. Washington was the test. Could he survive at all? Charlotte became the answer. He could start, control games, and lead a playoff offense. Everything after the knee surgery was the adjustment, when experience had to replace some of the lost speed. The roles changed. His responsibility for the ball did not. The starts settled the argument more firmly than any motivational speech. A coach can use a curiosity for a few minutes. He cannot build an opening lineup around one for most of a decade. Bogues also finished with a career assist-to-turnover ratio close to 5-to-1. Every possession he protected gave Johnson another chance to attack, Curry another chance to find daylight, or Mourning another chance to establish position. Even the less obvious numbers came from arriving early. During his double-double season, Bogues averaged more than 4 rebounds by reading where misses were headed. His famous block of Patrick Ewing followed the same logic. He reached the ball at the beginning of the shooting motion, before height made the shot unreachable. By the middle of the 1990s, that game had made him larger than the box score. His autobiography was called In the Land of Giants. In Space Jam, he appeared beside Charles Barkley, Larry Johnson, Patrick Ewing, and Sean Bradley as one of the NBA players whose talent is stolen. Audiences did not need the film to explain who Muggsy was. Fame made him a symbol for children who had been told their bodies were wrong for a sport. Yet belief alone could not produce an NBA handle, the strength to resist a post-up, the vision to find a cutter behind a 7-footer, or the conditioning to pressure a guard for 94 feet. Inspiration explains why the story travels. Skill explains why the career lasted. Bogues knew he had to bring something useful every day, because one poor stretch could be treated as proof that the experiment had finally failed. After retirement, he worked in real estate and returned to basketball as head coach of the Charlotte Sting in 2005. The team went 14-30 under him before the WNBA franchise folded. He later coached at the high school level and spoke to young players about preparation rather than impossible wishes. Away from basketball, he lost his mother and later his close friend Sharon Smith to cancer. Bogues and his former wife Kim eventually rebuilt their relationship and remarried in 2015. Charlotte repaired its relationship with him too. As the franchise reclaimed the Hornets' name in 2014, Bogues returned as a team ambassador. Wake Forest had already retired his number and placed him in its Hall of Fame. North Carolina later selected him for its Sports Hall of Fame. He remains Charlotte's leader in assists and steals. Those honors do not invent an all-star selection or a championship. They recognize what actually happened. So the original question returns with a different meaning. How did a 5'3" man survive in the NBA after every opponent knew the surprise was coming? He did it by moving the contest away from the places where height automatically won. He attacked the dribble before it rose. He made taller guards turn their backs before the offense was ready. He changed speed before a defender could extend his ARMs. He delivered the pass before the opening became obvious. He could not remove size from basketball, so he kept taking away the time required to use it. The testimony from opponents confirms the effect. Guards remembered giving up the ball to escape his pressure. Big men remembered searching for him before starting a dribble. Teammates remembered trusting him to call the action. They did not praise an entertaining exception. They described the decisions his presence forced them to make. There were limits. Bogues could not protect the rim, shoot over a contest whenever he wanted, or eliminate every post mismatch. Charlotte never won a championship, and he was never an all-star. Calling him a superstar would weaken the story. He was something harder to dismiss. A high-level NBA point guard who remained useful after the league had gathered 14 years of evidence against him. That is why the career is stronger than the slogan. A gimmick can survive an appearance. A publicity act can sell a photograph. Neither can average a points and assists double-double, direct a playoff team, establish franchise records, recover from a lost season, and earn another role when the original one disappears. The photographs will always remain. Bogues beside Manute Bol, Bogues standing between centers, Bogues almost disappearing beneath a line of shoulders. They freeze the comparison that made him famous. His career asks for a better one. Not body against body, but decision against decision, second after second, for 889 games. They had the height. He arrived first.